But my question, yes, I understand that, but my question was more exactly about which is can you explain us the reform that you are looking forward
Sure.
in the workplace?
Yes. So fundamentally, and without those federal protections, we look to our businesses to offer protections on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And we actually have created a scorecard based on this. So it's 0 to 100. Any business can get that perfect score of 100. And the weighting reflects that sense of importance. So a third of the points are tied to workplace protections. Then about a third of the points are tied to domestic partner healthcare benefits, and the so-called soft benefits are non-healthcare benefits. So the majority of Americans get their healthcare from their employer. And what that means in a real life sense is, aside from actual wages paid, benefits account for about a fifth of your total compensation. And so if the person in the next workstation happens to be straight and can get access to healthcare benefits for her husband, and I can't simply because I'm LGBT, then we see that as an issue of unequal pay for equal work. So we work with businesses to not only revise their healthcare plans, but all of the other policies that impact their workforce. Everything from bereavement leave,
Any benefit.
exactly, retirement options, relocation, and travel. The next subject that certainly is still a newer subject for some businesses, but we've managed to move the needle significantly for well over 200 businesses, is actually the instances of transgender inclusive healthcare coverage. So when an individual undergoes a gender transition, in those instances where there's an affiliated medical process, hormone replacement therapy, surgical procedures, and again, this is done through the recommendations of healthcare providers, as any other medical diagnosis would be. We have looked to our businesses to make sure that their healthcare plans do in fact cover that. And that's been essential to them actually getting that top score. And it's hard for me to understate just how many conversations we've had around that, and how much really, in some instances, basic education around transgender needs and really who this transgender community is, and as it relates to, again, issues of LGBT inclusion and workplace fairness. So when we talk about LGBT inclusive benefits, we're not just talking about partner benefits. So that's about a third of the points are there. And then about a third, we look to businesses to continue on with the types of employee engagement efforts that they're already doing and have been doing with respect to race and gender, ability, veteran status. There are all these different diversity categories that are very common to have programming around. So we look to see, for example, do they have an employee resource group that is LGBT or LGBTA specific? Last year I had the pleasure of several corporate visits here in Mexico City of US-based businesses with really vibrant LGBT and allied employee resource groups here in Mexico. So we look to them for that, and furthermore we look and see, do their philanthropic portfolios, their diverse supply chains, do these elements of how they're already operating business, are they inclusive of LGBT issues? So that you can call external engagement with the community or a public commitment to the community.
Now you mentioned earlier in our conversation that HRC has gotten to a point where some of the companies actually come to you and tell you, we want to be tested and we want to be in that index. How could you? I mean, what is the benefit for business owners to be LGBT inclusive and to have all these best practices? How is it profitable? How is it, more than just being politically correct? Why is it something they would want to do?
It's a super question, and the good thing is that, one, I'll say that at this point in time, those conversations are often about, we at HRC offering to the business, how can we help you catch up to your competitor? Because as you know, businesses respond to that sense of competition. And at this point in time, we have close to 200 perfect scored businesses across virtually every industry. So if an airline calls me, I can point to at least 2 other airlines that are already scoring a 100. So for some, it's an immediate reaction to, I want to catch up to my competitor. For others, there's a recognition that, and perhaps I'll flip the question, because we're often making the business case for the inclusion of LGBT people. What is the business case for discriminating against LGBT people, or for allowing for that type of discrimination to occur? So we know that that would result in the loss of talented employees for no good reason. You know, no business wants to be in a position to lose the next bright, marketing VP simply because their competitor has partner benefits, or because that workplace environment is not as inclusive. So for that, there's definitely what you might call the talent case. They want the best and brightest. Often, at least in the U.S., I hear this quite a lot. This phrase, "we're in a war for talent." I don't know if I agree with the war, but that's what they're saying. I mean, they're in constant competition.
And also the competition. It's like this trend about like the best place for work now.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not only for customers and all that. It's like the interest that employees are interested in working in the company.
Exactly, and that broader sense of corporate social responsibility really matters. One thing that surprised me, I've been in my position for about 5 years, and probably more in the last 2 or 3 years, hiring managers have been calling me saying, I was just interviewing this great candidate. I know that they're not LGBT, and they're asking me why we're an 85 and not a 100 on your index. So we know that for particularly younger workers, this is that benchmark. How serious is this company really taking diversity? Do they align with my values, my sense of inclusion? So from that aspect, it really matters. And then third, there's a huge consumer market out there to be tapped. In the U.S., the statistics show that the buying power of the LGBT community is somewhere between $750 and $790 billion. So that's money that this community has to spend. And you combine that with the sheer reach of the Human Rights Campaign, for example, that when we push a button and say, our annual corporate equality index is out, or our annual buyer's guide in which we show them the different brands is out, that's well over 1 million people receiving this information, and they're literally saying Coke or Pepsi. Thankfully they're both highly rated, but that matters to them. And they're telling us, my partner and I are deciding to buy a car, and we want to be sure that for such a big purchase, it's going to go to an LGBT-friendly company. So certainly the consumer aspect of it appeals to businesses. And, more and more, as I'm sure you're aware, in the state of New York and Washington State, it was actually big businesses that came out in support of marriage equality. So I think that there is a very real sense that businesses want to be on the right side of history, if you will, that they want to be able to show in 30 or 40 years, we were some of the first to embrace the LGBT community.
Do you think that right now the gay customer, it's like more social responsible? I mean, he is looking at, I know that right now gay people is looking at which brands are like supporting gay cause, but the thing is, do you think 5 years there was a change, or always was the responsibility?
Well, I know at least going back to about 2007, that the more in-depth marketing data showed that the LGBT consumer tends to be more savvy than other segments. In other words, they do the research on their businesses. They really want to know if they are, living their values or practicing, what
they don't change.
And that's an increase. That's a trend. I mean, that's getting bigger.
Exactly.
But it's changing. I mean,
well, I think exactly. I think that there continues to be more awareness, and we see even more engagement with our resources. For example, we have an iPhone application you can download, our Buying for Equality Guide. And it's a way to quickly compare brands, and it's free, it's downloadable. So we know from even the numbers of unique users that more and more people are actually using these tools to make their purchasing decisions. Well, at this point in time, if you combine all of our outlets, we've reached over 1 million people, and that's from a printed version of our reports, the iPhone application. For those that still text, we actually have a text function. Of course, all technology becomes obsolete, right? But we have a text option, and then of course all of our information is online. So we've seen those numbers get higher and higher. I mean, even on the iPhone application, the first month we opened that up to the public, we had about 40,000 unique downloads in 1 month. So it moves very quickly. It's a lot.
Yeah, I have a question. It's not really, I mean, it's not so much regarding your specific work, but that of HRC. What is the role of an organization like HRC in an election?
Well, certainly a lot of attention does go to the various elections, and not just the presidential election. At HRC, we do endorse candidates, those that have a proven track record of being LGBT inclusive. They also have a congressional scorecard, so they look at the actual votes of members of Congress and give them a rating. We like our ratings at HRC, obviously, but it is, it's a nice, quick way to communicate to people.
Is that lawmaking on record on your website also?
Yes, okay. It is. So these are all ways that, we at HRC as a staff of, over 100 can only do so much. So a lot of our work is to distribute resources that empower individuals. So in other words, we're not the ones voting at the polls in every state and in every municipality, but what we can do is make sure that we have an educated voting bloc, that people are actually looking at the records of their representatives and that they're making informed decisions based on that. So during an election year, again, a sizable side of the House, of the HRC House, will be on the road, will be helping members of Congress either preserve their seats or take on a new seat. We have, of course, supported President Obama. And so in an election year, I think the programs that I manage and that my colleagues manage will continue on, and that's education and outreach on these different programs and areas of focus, whether schools or the workplace. And at the same time, we have a very responsive set of constituents. So they are actually knocking on doors. We just had unfortunately a ban pass in North Carolina. I don't know if you heard about it, but Amendment 1. Even though that was a really disappointing loss, the infrastructure that was in place before that will continue on, of mobilized, interested, not just LGBT people, but allies who for months were knocking on doors or contacting their employers to ask and see, can you speak out against Amendment 1? I mean, all of this is that level of civic engagement that HRC is an integral part of.
Sorry, you told us about 4 issues. I mean, the thing is that we know about marriage and all that, but about workplace, it's like something very new, and we don't know many things about it. So these 4 issues that you mentioned about the workplace, that you're working with business, these 4 issues, are you trying to change the law or to put it in, to write it in the law, include it in the law?
Yes, and so
or you I mean, I really don't know American laws, but the thing is, do you have something like DOMA or Don't Tell, Don't Ask, like for the workplace issue?
We do, and the acronym is ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. And so that's the federal law that has not yet passed, for which next week we're having Senate hearings that would afford federal protections on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity.
But it's for no discrimination right now only. It includes...
For non-discrimination, exactly. That's what ENDA is. That's what ENDA is. There are not...
How do you spell it?
ENDA.
ENDA.
Recently you sent a lot of emails about a specific brand, H&M.
Oh yes,
to sign So pretty much H&M is pretty much a very gay brand, but it seems like why they don't want to sign the survey or something.
Well, what he's referencing, we had a campaign launch just a few weeks ago. We have literally hundreds of businesses taking our survey every year, and we have some businesses that have stayed quiet and that have subtly or even more overtly in marketing, for example, wanted to appeal to LGBT consumers or wanted to be known as maybe LGBT friendly. And the principle of our work is that's great, that sentiment is great, but there need to be concrete actions behind it. We need to know if you have a non-discrimination policy that's inclusive. We need to know if you have inclusive benefits. So some businesses have not yet filled out the survey And sometimes it's as simple as, you know, they're hesitant because they would score a 70 instead of a 100. And what we do is work with them to demonstrate to them that any engagement is positive. Taking that step and that commitment to being transparent in your policies and benefits is commendable, and we don't offer negative press to those who are, you know, exactly, we're not a 100. But I think to answer, if I'm now understanding your other question, so ENDA has not passed, and at the same time, businesses can offer their own ENDA-like policies. In terms of healthcare benefits, employers are not compelled to offer healthcare, and so we work on a principle of parity. Well, for heterosexual couples either. It's I can operate a business and not offer a family healthcare. You know, businesses are not legally compelled to do that. Right. So we are not trying to inscribe into law something that is not fundamentally part of how the U.S. operates in terms of the private sector. That was my question. Exactly. But what we are doing is saying, we know that even though businesses are not legally compelled to do that most people get their health care benefits from their employers. And so if they are offering those benefits to a married heterosexual couple, then we look for equality or parity to say, okay, would that similarly
and that could help,
you
know.
Exactly.
In a way, and that could help to have this benefits.
Yes, exactly.
It's not necessarily another law.
That's right. Not all of this will be about legal changes. So the 4 priorities I outlined in terms of Congress, from hate crimes to don't ask, don't tell, I mean, if you had to summarize some of the priorities of, broadly speaking, the LGBT movement or the Human Rights Campaign, you know, we have been moving towards those for years. At the same time, we know from our own history in the U.S., we know globally that just because a law changes doesn't mean that that you know, winning of hearts and minds, or that there's necessarily a culture change. So that's where a lot of the foundation programs come in, to work and connect directly with business leaders, with you know, healthcare providers. I mean, just if you look at the HRC mission to ensure that people feel safe in their communities, in their homes, in their schools, in their workplace, it's all of these different moving parts that together make up the work of the Human Rights Campaign.
Who are the major supporters of ENDA, both in Congress and I don't know if companies can publicly endorse an act like that?
Yeah, I think for that question I'll speak primarily on the private sector side, but the companies. We actually have we have a coalition of over 80 major businesses that have lent their names in support of the passage of ENDA. And that includes, you know, so many, actually it's 80, you know, from General Mills to many of the banking and financial service companies, because for them it's just common sense that you would want the law of the land to be equal across the board, particularly if, you know, for businesses that are operating in 10 states, you know, you don't want managers in one state, and this is why they implement their own policies. You don't want a manager in Florida abiding by a different policy than a manager in New York or California.
It makes it easier to work.
Exactly.